Having trouble mapping across? Keep watching. I'm Damon, this is Life Mastery Gym, and I teach people just like you cutting-edge NLP processes and techniques so that you can master your life and take charge of your destiny. So if that sounds good, make sure you click that subscribe button right down here so you can get these videos on a regular basis. I've been practicing and teaching NLP for several years, and in that time I have done lots of mapping across this for myself and especially with clients, because it is so effective. By the end of this video, you're gonna have a much better understanding of mapping across, especially if you're running into some trouble, like if you're trying to do mapping across and it's not quite working. We're gonna delve into that right here. So this video was inspired by a viewer like you who was asking me questions about mapping across based on a video I had done called NLP Techniques, What Everyone Wants and How to Get It. I'll link that video here or in the description somewhere around here so you can find that video. And so they asked questions about it because obviously they were implementing the process that I give in that video. And so this video is based on that. So if you have questions or if you have comments or if you have topics that you would like me to cover in future videos, make sure you let me know in the comment section below, and maybe I'll make a video about whatever you're asking about or whatever your suggestion is. So first off, I'm gonna do a brief explanation about what mapping across is. You can refer to that other video that I mentioned if you wanna go deeper with it. Or have the understanding of the full process that I was giving there, because in that video I give you a very large mapping across that you can do, and I'll explain more about that when I get into the questions. But in general, what mapping across is, it's a technique in NLP for modeling. And in NLP, well, basically what NLP started as is a way to model successful behavior, and not just the behavior, but what goes on inside of us when we are succeeding at something. What is going on inside of us when we're not succeeding at something. And then we can also model other people. We can model ourselves, the successful parts of our lives we can model, and then apply that to the not so successful parts of our lives. So mapping across is basically a fundamental of modeling. And the way that it's most often taught in NLP trainings is through what we call submodalities. So modalities are your five senses: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, taste, and smell. Those are the ways in which we take in information through those five senses. And then we represent that information inside of us internally. We represent or represent, and that's what creates our map of reality. So we're not actually living and responding to objective reality. We're actually responding to that map, because objective reality there would be too much information coming at us all at once. So instead we create a map, and a map is useful because it gives us it's supposed to give us the exact information we need to get from point A to point B, but oftentimes that doesn't happen. And this is why we have NLP. So we can go in there and find these elements of your map and say, okay, well, what's missing here? So that we can then enrich your map with more choices, more resources, more whatever information is needed. Now, how do we do all that? I mean, it seems like, wow, that seems very, like a difficult process to go in and be able to identify that when we're talking about something that's happening in your mind, that's happening internally. And yes, there's a certain amount of truth to that. So we have things like mapping across that helps shine the light on that. We're able to model another person's map of reality who is very successful at something, and then we apply that map to ourselves. Or like I said, you can find something within yourself where you're an area where you're very successful, and look at an area where you're not very successful, and then look at the maps at both of those, and then realize, okay, well, I know what's missing here now because I can compare it to this map over here where I'm more successful. Now, like I said, we often use submodalities to do this. It's probably the way that's taught most often. And what are submodalities? It's just the finer details of modalities. So let's say the visual modality. Well, whether or not it's in color or black and white, that would be a submodality. If you're seeing images, well, how big are the images? Are they life size? And it's like you're actually when you visualize, it's like you're actually back into whatever situation you're visualizing, or if it's a past memory, do you go right back to it as if you're actually there, so it's surrounding you? Or is it more like a square, like an image? So that would be examples of submodalities. We also have submodalities in the other modalities like auditory. So how loud something is would be another submodality. So if I'm hearing a critical voice, while I'm, say, working on a project and I hear a critical voice saying, you're going to screw this up or something like that. Well, the direction of the voice would be a submodality. The volume of the voice would be a submodality. The tonality, whether the voice was male or female, all of these things would be the sub details of the modality. And we do have kinesthetic submodalities as well. So when we are mapping across, we're often going into an experience, remembering an experience, taking note of the submodalities, and then saying, okay, what's the other experience like? And we'll notice there's always a lot of differences in the submodalities. And so we map across the submodalities. But submodalities are not the only way that you can map across. There's other ways to do it. There's probably too many ways to count. So I'm not going to go into all of that. I'm going to go straight to the questions that this person was asking about mapping across. In the video that inspired this video, I told people to take an area of life where you were very fulfilled. And so in general, we can break our life down into, I don't know, 3 to 5 major life contexts. You can think of like career, personal life, married life, being a parent. These are all large chunk aspects, contexts in our lives. And so chances are there are one or more than one where we are very fulfilled, where we're like, yeah, things are good. Now, this can be difficult because sometimes we just think, well, that's how things should be. But it's really good to acknowledge like, oh yeah, this area of my life, I am fulfilled. I don't feel like there's something that's lacking here. Sure, I want it to be better. We always want to improve, but in general, I'm fulfilled in this area of my life. And then taking the areas of your life where you're not fulfilled. And what I suggested was creating a map of both of them, and then mapping one across to the other, mapping the successful one, the elements or the structures, the strategies, and all of those things that I mentioned in that video to map across to that area of your life where you're unfulfilled. And that should shine the light on, well, what is it that you need to do here? So the question is, what if they're an 8 or a 9 on the scale of 1 to 10 of how fulfilled they are in a particular area of their life? Is that going to be good enough to use as a map, as a model for the other areas of your life? Now, here's the thing about when we say, and we do this a lot in NLP, we say, a scale from 1 to 10, okay? Here's the thing about that. It's really arbitrary. I don't care who your teacher is. I don't care what training you're in. When they ask that question on a scale from 1 to 10, yes, it can be useful, but it is absolutely arbitrary. It is, who's to say? I mean, there's no real way to judge on a scale from 1 to 10. So when you break down your areas of your life and you're asking yourself, well, which ones are my more fulfilled? Which ones am I less fulfilled in? And if you want to use a scale from 1 to 10 to apply to that, if you find it useful, go right ahead. You go, oh, this area of my life, I'm about at an 8. This area of my life, I'm at a 10. So yeah, this is good. I'm going to go with the 10. Of course you would. Why wouldn't you? So the question is, well, what if I have no area of my life that is at a 10? The closest I can get is to an 8. Well, that's just it. I mean, you're looking at which area of your life are you most fulfilled? That's going to create a great map. It doesn't matter if it's an 8, 9, or 10. You just want to find the one that you feel most fulfilled in. What area of your life are you most fulfilled in? And then you make a map of that. Some modalities work really well, but there's some other things that you can do. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Just use that. Use the best representation, the best example that you have to use for that. So whether or not you really feel like it's a 9 or a 10, it really doesn't matter. Just use the area of your life where you're most fulfilled. And that's going to be the best representation that you could use to create a map for your other areas of your life that you're less fulfilled in. Now, the other question this person asks is, they basically say that they are more auditory and more kinesthetic, not so much visual. So what do they do with that? Like, they can't visualize very well. Now, most people, I would say, are visual. And I would also say that the visual modality is the easiest one to work in. It's also typically the most powerful. And why is this? Because when you visualize, or when you actually see something in person, it's not in your mind, you're actually looking at it, you can access simultaneously more information than you can in any other modality. Think about this. How many colors can you see when you look at a painting? Well, whatever colors are there, you see them all at once. You don't have to focus on one or the other. You grasp this right away. How many voices can you listen to at one time and understand what the people are saying. I can only do one, maybe two if they're saying very simple things. Three voices, forget about it. I can't, and I don't know many people who can. I'm sure that some people can do better than I can if you're musically trained or if you have a really good auditory sense. But in general, you can't make sense of too much auditory information at once. The same thing with the kinesthetic. If you're embodying too many feelings at once or too many tactile feelings or in your proprioception, it's hard to pay attention to where exactly that information is located and how much of it is and what's different and what's not. So visual, hands down, is the best modality for pretty much anything because of how much information you can access all at once. Now, some of you are not very visual, and to those people, I would say work on it. It's worth it. It's worth it to develop your ability to visualize. And here's the thing, a lot of people also say, I don't visualize very well. And what I tell them is I don't either. The point is not to be so visual that your images are like in high definition with every single detail and it's super vivid. No, it's not. You see what you need to see. That's what visualization is for. Some of you are really good at it naturally, some of you not, but it doesn't matter. You only need to see what you need to see. Now, to get to the question about this, you can map across any modality. So you can map across purely in the auditory sense. If you're using submodalities, you just map across the auditory submodalities. You don't even have to go to the visual at all if you don't want to. So just know that. It doesn't, mapping across doesn't mean only visualization. It doesn't mean that it has to be visualization at all. You can completely leave the visuals out of it, though I think it would be very helpful in any successful mapping across that you definitely put some time and effort into finding out what are the visuals there. They are there. We all visualize. Don't say that you don't. We all do. So it's a matter of finding what is there. You can map across in the auditory. You can map across in the kinesthetic. But here's the thing about the kinesthetic. When people often say, well, I'm very kinesthetic. And like this person who asked this question, I doubt they are kinesthetic in the sense that we're looking for the kinesthetic information that we're looking for. They probably mean that they're kinesthetic in the emotional and evaluative way. And the reason why I did this is because that's typically where in our body is when we have that sort of evaluative or emotional feeling. It's usually in our chest, it's in our solar plexus, or it's in our stomach. We all have that. In that sense, we are all kinesthetic. All of us have that feeling, and all of us have that feeling right before we do something, right before we make a decision, right before we draw a conclusion, because that's what we have to do. We take in information through our five senses, mainly through visual and auditory, maybe tactile kinesthetic, or maybe proprioceptive kinesthetic. But that evaluative kinesthetic, that emotional kinesthetic, always comes after we have received enough information to make an evaluation, whether that's emotional or not. So he's probably referring to the evaluative kinesthetic, okay? Leave that out for right now. I mean, yes, you want to know in the end, when you map across, you do rely on that evaluative kinesthetic to say, okay, do I feel differently about this? You want to depend on it then. But if you're truly mapping across in the kinesthetic modality, what you need to go and find the details of what things feel like in a tactile sense, and how your body feels in a proprioceptive sense. Most of you are not going to have that experience. So when might a mapping across be very kinesthetic? Well, what if I'm working with an athlete? An athlete will tend to be very kinesthetic in the proprioceptive sense. So if I were mapping across, like let's say a basketball player came to me for help and they said, my free throw shots are really, really good, but it's a strange thing. I really struggle to do a layup, like when I'm right under the net. When I go to shoot the ball, I usually miss, but if it's a free throw, I do very well. And I'll say, okay, well, let's check that out. So we would visit the experience of shooting a free throw, and I'd say, okay, what do you see? And then we would get all the submodalities, we'd write all those down, and I'd say, well, what do you hear? And they might say, I don't really pay attention to the auditory. In fact, I block it out because it's too distracting. Okay, great. So we know that about this. We need to block out auditory. And then I would say, okay, what do you feel in your body? Not how do you feel emotionally or evaluative emotional, or what are your evaluations here? I would say, how does your body feel? And especially in sports, athletes know how their body is supposed to feel, the alignment of it. And that's very, very important. And they might say, oh yeah, okay, my arm I need to know that my arm is right under the ball. I need to know that my wrist is cocked back. And they're not looking at this because they're looking at the net. Basketball players paying attention to all this alignment before they shoot the ball. And I assure you, a professional basketball player, when they shoot that ball, they pretty much know whether or not it's going in because of proprioception, because they know how their body was supposed to feel. They know how the ball was supposed to snap. Then we would take all those elements and then we would map them across to when the basketball player is doing the layups. And so chances are we would find that the basketball player doesn't apply all of those same submodalities to the layup. And so that would be our job, to map that across and then apply it and then test it and say, okay, you know, what happens whenever the person does the layup when those submodalities are applied? And that'll let us know if it worked or not. When people say that they're kinesthetic, and when you're mapping across and you're looking to the kinesthetic modality to map those submodalities across, if you're using emotions and you're using the evaluative kinesthetic, it's probably not going to work, and it's probably only going to be more confusing. So you'd want to stick to the tactile and proprioceptive, save the evaluative feeling for when you've completed the mapping across, and then you say, okay, do I feel any different about this? That's a good indication that it worked. And of course, then you have to test it to know for sure if it worked or not. When people ask questions, chances are other people out there have the same question. So if you had similar or the same questions, I hope that answers it for you. And if not, again, let me know in the comment section below. I'd be happy to answer those either by responding to your comment or possibly making another video about this topic. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button and click the bell so you'll be notified when I put new videos out. And last but not least, if you can think of a friend or a family member who would benefit from this video, make sure you share it with them. Take care.